There's 10,000 of them. There's 6 of us. So, I mean, that's pretty even.
We flew low, and that was our bread and butter.
So I'm here today courtesy of the Skyraiders and the other aviators that supported us.
And then the helicopter started falling, and I remember seeing the ground coming, and then everything went black.
We were actually going pretty deeply into Cambodia, and that was a no-no, but we didn't know that.
And I'm realizing, yeah, this was not a good idea, but I can't stop now because he's going to kill me if I do.
We both were willing to die for each other. If there's anything better than that, I don't know what it is.
Stick around. From the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund, founders of The Wall, this is Echoes of the Vietnam War. I'm your host, Michael Crone, bringing you stories of service, sacrifice, and healing from people who still feel the impact of that conflict more than 50 years later. Episode 89, The Secret War, Part 2. Right after this.
Hi, I'm Anne Margaret. I went to Vietnam to entertain the troops in 1966 and 1968. My guys, my gentlemen, if you lived through the Vietnam War era, you know the impact that the war had. But today, we are in danger of history being lost. Current generations know very little about the war or the people who served. As more of our Vietnam vets pass away each day, their stories are being lost to history. Together, we can change that. The Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund is the organization that built the wall. It works to ensure that future generations will understand the war's impact. Let's help keep the promise that the wall was built on. Never forget. Visit vvmf.org to find out how you can get involved.
Just a quick warning, this episode contains graphic descriptions of combat, injury, and death. It may not be suitable for every listener. In part 1 of this series, we introduced you to MACV-SOG, a joint combined special forces unit that conducted a secret war in Laos, Cambodia, and North Vietnam for 8 years. Secrecy was so essential that SOG team members were forbidden, under penalty of imprisonment, to even mention the term SOG to anyone for 20 years. In recent years, these guys have begun to tell their stories at reunions, in books they've written, and in interviews.
When you put a car 15 in my hand, I'm as tall as anybody on the battlefield. That's an equalizer.
That's Dick Dynamite Thompson from part 1 of this series. He was a young SOG lieutenant in 1968 and has written a book about his experiences. One of the more hair-raising stories Dick shared with me is about a search and destroy mission he undertook with his 6-man team across the fence in Laos.
I went after battalion size a lot, but I actually had one mission where it was a North Vietnamese division, 10,000 North Vietnamese. So, and people sometimes say, well, you went after them with a six-man team? And I tell them, I said, well, as I thought about it, there's 10,000 of them, there's 6 of us. So, I mean, that's pretty even, 6 SOG guys against, 10,000. And besides, they can't all shoot at us at one time.
Right.
Because they'd be shooting each other.
Right.
So they end up coming at you almost single file. You just got to have a lot of ammunition with you, but more than that, you've got to have all that air power. And with that one, the mission was to go find them and figure out where they were going, where they were hiding during the daytime. And I wanted to be able to identify a target box, a piece of terrain that I could give the coordinates to the four corners of that and say, they are inside, this piece of terrain right here. You might not see them, but they're in, all 10,000 of them are in there.
Okay.
And I had scheduled 6 B-52 bombers to come in, each one of them carrying 110 500-pound bombs.
Holy
So
smokes.
660 bombs that would be dropped over a period of about 2 minutes into that target box.
You're just going to turn that whole box into a crater.
Yeah, it just wipes everything out and everything around, because it creates like an earthquake. Everything is moving around all around it. So, the first day we took out, estimated around 3,000 of them with the air support and everything I had, because I got in trouble going in, shot the helicopter down I was in. So I ended up, with a broken back and ribs and some other things like that. But, we took out a lot of them before I finally got out that day. And then they've bandaged me up and put extra belts around me and reinforced my back and sent me back out the next morning. But the next morning we had a lot of contact, but we were able to identify where they were located and send the coordinates back to Guam, to where the B-52s were launching from. So they knew where to put the bombs when they came in that night, and just wiped them out.
So I want to make sure, I'm sorry, Dick. I want to make sure I understand this. You go in on a helicopter, you get shot down, you break some ribs, you break your back, but you took a little break there in the middle to go get bandaged up, but otherwise you're pretty much still just doing the mission.
Well, and I got a few hours sleep that night. They gave some
that's
pain.
what they prescribe for a broken back, right? A few hours of sleep.
We took what they call the pistol belt, the big wide belt that you wear around your waist that has your ammunition and water and all that stuff on it. So they took 3 of those with nothing on it, just the belt, and put those 3 belts around me. They put a piece of wood, I don't know if it's plywood, something, with a bandage on it to cushion it a little bit, put that right on my lower back underneath those belts. And then, when I went in that morning, I didn't carry a rucksack. I couldn't, I just couldn't manage the pain with the rucksack. My rucksack was usually 70 pounds or more. Mm-hmm. So I couldn't do that with my back the way it was then. I carried some ammunition, but I couldn't carry that. But anyway, I was able to go in, and we had a pretty long fight, while we were there, while I was trying to get the coordinates located, and eventually got out. And
so after you crashed, weren't you at risk of being captured? You had.
Yeah.
So
the helicopter crashed. We were, as we were coming in on the short final, we were about 250 feet in the air, and they opened fire on us, hit the helicopter. The bullets were coming through. A bullet came through the floor and hit one of my guys in the leg. And then the helicopter started falling, and I remember seeing the ground coming, and then everything went black. And then I remember opening my eyes at some point and kind of asking myself, am I dead or alive? And then my hearing started to come back, and I could hear the bullets cracking by and see it digging the dirt up around me. I was in the grass about two and a half feet high. And so the bullets were coming in there. So I figured I must still be alive if they're shooting at me, trying to kill me.
Mhm.
So, and there was a bomb crater close by, and I could see my other two guys who were on the helicopter with me laying out in the grass. One had been shot in the leg, so I crawled over to him. I got him and dragged him over the crater and pushed him in, and went back and got the other one, pushed him in, and I got in there. The pilots had been wounded in the helicopter in addition to it slamming down. So we were having a pretty heavy fight going on because the NVA were trying to come down across that little grassy open area and get close enough they could throw a hand grenade into that bomb crater with us. So we had to keep them back far enough. So we were working gunships and other air support we were just stacking them up all around us like cordwood. The whole field like they were just covered, with bodies, with them trying to get into us. And, we're shooting back, we're throwing hand grenades. We're doing, whatever we could for, most of the day until they were finally able to get us out. And we have an aircraft called a Covey. It's a forward air controller, small fixed-wing aircraft, and it's got an Air Force pilot flying it, and it's got one of our old team leaders in there, experienced team leaders, and we're talking and coordinating where I want the airstrikes and things like that. And he's telling me where they are. It's 3 o'clock, 100 meters. There's 4 of them. I can see them crawling in the grass. So I could shoot the grenade launcher over, where they were, or try to throw a grenade where they were. And then one of the things that happens is, your stress level gets kind of high. And when your stress level goes up, you don't make good decisions. Your IQ goes down, your emotional intelligence goes down, your decision-making ability goes down, and you make dumb decisions. And I made one. So I called the guy in the plane above us, and I said, look, they're crawling all around out there in the grass. I'm going to crawl out there with them. They won't know I'm out there with them. They know I'm not stupid enough to do that. So I'll be out there, and I'm going to grab one of those jokers and bring him back into the crater. And, the Covey said, I don't think that's a good idea.
What was your rationale? What did you think you'd accomplish?
Because if I could get one, he would know where they were. He could tell us all kinds of information.
And you think he would? You think he would tell you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
There are ways to, anyway.
Gotcha.
So,
As you listen to this next bit, keep in mind that Dick has some broken ribs and a broken back.
So, I crawled out, and I could hear somebody crawling and moving, getting close to me. So when he got close enough, I just reached out and grabbed him, by the shoulder. And he gasped real loud and fired off his weapon, trying to shoot me. And I grabbed it and kind of pushed it, but he grabbed mine and pushed mine out of the way. And we're rolling around there, and I'm realizing just how weak I am. You just can't do anything with it. When your back breaks, it's just extremely painful. I mean, you can't even breathe every time you move around, but we're fighting. And I'm realizing, this was not a good idea. This was kind of dumb, but I can't stop now because he's going to kill me if I do. So I managed to I shot him in the shoulder. I thought, well, that'll help out a little bit, but I was just getting weaker. So he was still coming at me. And for some reason, he turned loose of my weapon, and he just creamed me as hard as he could right in the nose. Blood went everywhere, my eyes crossed. But turning my weapon loose like that, now it's free, and I was able to point it at him. So I was now about 3 inches or so from his cheek. And I could see the expression on his face because he realized that he was getting ready to die.
Mm-hmm.
And he closed his eyes because he knew less than a second. And I just fired off a 5 or 6 round burst on automatic.
This was the Car 15?
Yeah, into his, right into his head. And it just exploded, brain matter and blood and everything just covered my face. So I left him and went back to the crater because that didn't work. One of the things I did with my teams is we had a thorough after-action review after every mission. And we talked through what went well, what didn't do so well, what did the North Vietnamese do that we wasn't expecting, all of these kinds of things. What do we need to practice some before we go back out there again? One of the blinding flashes of the obvious that I had was, like I mentioned a few minutes ago, when your stress level goes up, you start making really bad decisions. That was a bad decision to go out and try to get this guy. And I didn't realize it then, but way down the years down the road, that would become a book that I would write. The stress effect, why smart people make dumb decisions. Mm-hmm. And I learned that over and over several times, throughout the years.
Didn't take the first time.
Yeah, because, I told you on this particular mission, I went back out again the next morning.
Right.
And a little different location, but the mountain and kind of a rocky area. But I decided to go out and get another one. And I went through 3 of them this time before I finally gave up and went back to the where my guys were. But I did get a lot of documents and stuff off of these 3. Mm-hmm. So at least I had something to take back with me.
Mm-hmm.
After a short break, we'll hear from a U.S. Air Force pilot who provided close air support for SOG missions, including one that resulted in a Medal of Honor for Green Beret Sergeant Franklin D. Miller. Stick around. Let's talk about the wall for a minute. It is widely considered to be the memorial that changed memorials forever. Its design invites a level of engagement, of introspection, of reverence that no fountain, no statue of a cannon or a man on a horse could ever match. The volunteers who work there often talk about wall magic, that unexpected, often spiritual connection or discovery that happens when you visit the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. It's one of the reasons why the wall's design has inspired so many other memorials around the world. Of course, there is one little problem with the wall's design. 140 panels of polished black granite aren't exactly portable. So, unless you can get yourself to Washington, D.C., how are you supposed to experience wall magic for yourself? Well, guess what? We already thought of that. In 1996, VVMF unveiled an exact replica of the wall that could be packed into an 18-wheeler and hauled to cities and towns all across America. Since then, the wall that heals has been displayed in nearly 700 communities throughout the nation, spreading the healing legacy of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial to millions of visitors. Sure, there are other versions of the wall that travel around the country, but the wall that heals is the only one that is an exact replica of the one in Washington, created and maintained by the same organization that built the wall in the first place. And not only that, the wall that heals is accompanied and curated by VVMF employees who work with host communities to ensure that the experience is as close as possible to the real thing. And that includes wall magic. But you don't have to take my word for it. You can check out episode 15 of this podcast to learn what happens to people's hearts when this traveling exhibit rolls into a real-life American community. The 30th season of The Wall That Heals includes visits to 31 communities across the country this year, starting with Sebring, Florida, March 6th through 9. To see the rest of this year's tour schedule and to learn how you can bring The Wall That Heals to your town, visit vvmf.org. Do you have loved ones who survived the Vietnam War but died after returning home? Did you know you can honor them at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial? We're accepting applications for the 2025 In Memory Honor Roll through March 29th. We also have an In Memory Facebook group with more than 26,000 members, so be sure to join that if you want to feel part of a community of people who've experienced a loss similar to yours. To find out why this program is so important to the family of an In Memory honoree, check out episode 16 of this podcast. You'll find the In Memory Honor Roll application and a link to the Facebook group by going to vvmf.org and clicking on In Memory. When SOG teams were being inserted or extracted by helicopters, there was usually an air support package that included both rotary and fixed-wing aircraft. In an age of jets, the A-1 Skyraider was a flying anachronism. It was a single-engine, propeller-driven plane, and it was nicknamed SPAD after the French fighter plane from World War I. But the Skyraiders could fly low and slow, and they could carry as much ordnance as a bomber, and that made them very valuable as armed escorts for SOG teams and the helicopters trying to insert or extract them. Don Engebretson flew with a detachment of 10 A-1s from the 56th Special Operations Wing called OLA, O-L-A-A, which stands for Operating Location Alpha Alpha. OLA's sole focus was to support SOG, and Don was a key figure in a famous SOG operation involving RT Vermont. Here he is discussing it on SOGcast, an excellent podcast hosted by John Stryker-Meyer, who speaks first.
Today, we're going to focus on a critical mission that was January 5th, 1970 with RT Vermont, which led to the team leader, Franklin Doug Miller, being a recipient of the Medal of Honor for actions on this day. But a crucial part of that story spun around A-1 Skyraider support of that recon team. And from my personal experience, I've got several times when, had it not been for the Skyraiders breaking an enemy attack around our perimeter, we wouldn't have gotten out. So I'm here today courtesy of the Skyraiders and the other aviators that supported us.
I think you will find in the history of the Air Force close air support that we did some of the best work maybe ever in that time frame with those Skyraiders. We flew low, and that was our bread and butter.
If you allow me, I want to turn just a little bit to that day with RT Vermont, where Sergeant Frank Miller was the 1-0 on the ground. And it was in Cambodia, which at that point, we had never had Skyraider support there. But on this day, they did. The team was in the ground, and RT Vermont was inserted. They moved away from the main LZ, and as they moved, they were crossing a trail which had a tripwire on it. And the third or fourth Montagnard across it didn't take seriously the tripwire. Anyway, he activated it. When it exploded, it wounded several members on the team. So the team was already wounded before they make any enemy contact. And at some point, now they're in enemy contact. When did you first get involved in explaining about the unique unit, OLA, O-L-A-A, which is unique in Air Force history in and of itself?
Okay, I was a pilot at OLA. It was a small unit. We only had 10 airplanes and 12 pilots. And this day was on alert. I had been in country now for about 3 months, And on the 5th of January, I was flying with another lieutenant who was a new flight lead, and I was the wingman. So on this day, my lead, and myself were in a bunk area, and we got the klaxon, and we ran out to the airplanes, and that airplane was set up for a SOG load. A lot of CBU-25 and 2 cans of nape. And unbeknownst to me at the time, I didn't know whether we were in, I knew we were in the area of the tri-border area.
Yeah.
But we were actually going pretty deeply into Cambodia.
Sure.
And that was a no-no, but we didn't know that. Neither one, because it was just, we rendezvous with the FAC, and then we start getting a briefing. On this day, we were sent down there for a spin down, and that was a team that was in danger, and it was a prairie fire emergency when they called us to come.
And what you didn't know was that at that point, Miller and his team had been in heavy contact. They had moved, and when they moved, they left literally a blood trail.
Yes.
As they moved from where they had that explosive device, the tripwire, to hit the team. And the medic was patching up people. Brown was patching up people as they went along. And they made contact, and they had devastating automatic fire, and the team was literally fighting for its life.
Later, I learned it was estimated that they thought a platoon, but maybe even a larger force.
Right.
And so they left, and I know you guys never wanted to do this, but they left. There were blood trails. There was equipment left behind. The enemy heard the blast, and they get, from what I'm told, they get zoned in, and when they're on you, they're going to be on you, and they see these signs.
And again, the team had moved down a mountainside, and then that explosion goes off. They continue down, but they're near that creek.
They actually crossed. They were on one side of the creek, and they crossed over the creek, which was about 2 feet deep at the time.
Right.
When they got on the other side, Miller went into the defensive mode immediately and started to pick them off. And one of the yards that was later was killed. So it was a 7-man team.
Right.
And one of the yards was doing a great job of picking them off, and they were keeping them at abeyance for a while.
Right.
And the terrain on the other side of the creek, this would be the eastern side. This was the creek ran north-south. And the rest of the team was at different positions.
This is going back to Steve Moore's book, which is the sound of A-1 Skyraiders arriving overhead was like an answered prayer for the recon team. And the 1-0 Miller is being careful because they want to make sure they mark their position. And so there's some question back and forth about it being marked. And again, returning to the book, apparently Ensbretson was the only aerial observer who saw the small waffling smoke rising from the high, dense foliage, defining the V that marked the on-scene riverbed. And so this is like you're hearing other things, other people, but your eyesight focused on that. And that was where you had to put this, and from your doing research, how did that smoke get there, first of all? And even that's like, holy shit phenomenon.
What happened was we were being briefed on the way over.
Sure.
This wasn't too far to go.
Right.
And things were happening fast.
And you can monitor the FM frequency with a team on the ground.
And I am a poor listener. I'll be the first person to admit it. So I had my helmet so tight around my ears so I could listen to 3 radios at one time. One time my head would be throbbing all the time. We'd be out there for 4 hours and my head's One time I took my helmet off for about 2 seconds and the noise was ungodly. I built engines in my life. The noises and rattling. I couldn't wait to get the darn thing back on my head.
We're talking about the noise of an A-1 Skyraider.
It's just... it is a very unpleasant existence in the cockpit of the airplane. And so now we're going and we're getting instructions. And I'm listening to all three radios. And I do hear the team, some of the screaming and things that are going on.
Yeah.
And Ed Blythe was on a Prick 25, I believe, is the radio that he had. And I could tell it was desperate. And I heard them talking, and the forward air controller, John Laheka, he made a very good mark with a rocket. Rockets are not exacting, and they can be erratic, but it was a close mark. I know that Miller threw grenades in to keep the enemy at abeyance on the other side of the creek. They're fighting for that ground,
right?
And they don't want the bad guys on the other side of the creek. And it wasn't that big an area. So I could hear the talking, and I heard them as I'm going to fly in, and their river. Why, there's no river. We don't see any river.
Not until you get right on it.
No, we never saw the creek or the river because the vegetation, I don't know, in Cambodia, I'd say at least 100-foot high trees and maybe more than that.
Sure.
Probably not 2 or 3.
We're talking northern Cambodia, which still carried over the very similar
it could have
jungle
been 200
to
feet.
what you had in Laos, right?
And this comes into play.
Absolutely.
And so now as I'm looking, I see his mark. I hear them talking on the radio about Miller's wanting the Willie Pete's, and he throws that Willie Pete down to Miller. And he's on much higher ground, and maybe he heaved it 15 feet or whatever.
Right.
And then he took that and he threw it into the creek.
And you could hear that on the FM radio.
That.
Yeah.
Next thing now, can I see this? It's not as much Willie Pete as a rocket would be. The rocket had more smoke, but I saw the little whiffs of smoke coming out in the nearby area, and I knew where that was then. But it's more complicated because I'm at altitude. I'm looking down at trees.
And you're going over 100 plus miles an hour.
130, 40 miles an hour.
And you're the wingman to the squadron leader.
And so we're going in at an angle, to the southeast.
This is all milliseconds happening.
It is. It is hard to explain what you...
You're doing a good job. Keep going.
Okay. And so I did see the Willie Pete.
Yeah.
I also could tell where the river would be because you can see the trees forming that V.
Right.
And I'm lining up with that, and I'm hearing that they're going across the creek. For some reason, my lead that day, which I won't never know exactly, he displaced himself far west of where the creek was.
Yeah.
And it was a V. The higher terrain as we were flying south was off to our left side.
Yeah.
There were a lot of bad guys there.
Your squad leader goes in with Run, who's apparently drifting from what you know as the point and the smoke that came from the recon team that needs the ordnance on that smoke.
That is absolutely correct.
And
he was far displaced away from that. And he was in front of me.
Yeah.
And now we're paralleling the river, the creek, and I see him out in front of me, and I'm listening to I see the smoke, and I'm armed up. I'm going to drop CBUs.
What's your cluster bomb units?
Yes, and these will roll out the back of tubes. They weighed about 9 pounds each. They roll out the back. And I don't remember the exact numbers, but and we could drop 1 tube at a time. We could drop a canister of 9 tubes. We had all, and it was.
Which could be several hundred at some point.
A lot. Yeah. But also a very complicated system to set up your ordnance drops so you didn't make mistakes and drop off the wrong thing.
Right.
So all this is going through my mind, and I'm calculating, and I see this. And I'm dropping, and my lead's out in front of me, and then I saw him jinking, and I'm looking at the plane like I'm overhead of it, pointing it out, and I see the helmet on his head, and I hear him, and he says, pull off, don't drop.
Right, and then we can go to the book here because Steve Moore captured this. Ensbretson, however, was roaring in only 20 feet above the treetops, which reached nearly 100 feet into the Cambodian sky. The shouts of Blythe to put it right on us were still ringing in his ears as his section leader shouted him to abort his run. Ensbretson had less than a second to decide which way to react, and he opted to risk his career to answer the frantic pleas of the Green Berets below. He dumped a partial load of CBU-25 bomblets right over the treetops, where the smoke was rising from. Coffee pilot John LaHecca noted intense enemy gunfire exploding from several hillside locations as the propeller-driven fighter zoomed through the fire zone. As he pulled out, Ensbretson heard shouting and screams from various men over the team's radio. This is on FM, which must have been left open. His head began swimming with apprehension momentarily as he feared that his orders had landed directly on the Green Beret team. He was hoping that he is saved. I'm screwed, he thought. I hit them. So what was that moment? I mean, time expansion, a second now turns into, must feel like hours for you. At that moment, you dump the CBU-25, you hear on the FM. What was that like, Don? That moment.
Proudest moment of my life. Please.
So we're quoting, by the way, this is a quoting from a Silver Star citation that was put in after this mission for Don. And in it, of course, they talk about the lethal small arms and automatic weapons fire from the enemy at the aircraft. And despite the intense enemy gunfire, Lieutenant Ensbretson rolled in for a second pass on the same heading and again dropped his ordnance at treetop level to assure precise delivery. The fact, again, called enemy gunfire pointed this out on numerous positions. Lieutenant Ensbretson made 6 more passes, each one an exact duplicate of the first 2, knowingly exposing himself again and again to the enemy ground fire as he drove his aircraft over the target on the same single run-in heading. Finally, the enemy was forced to break contact, and the Spads, with very little ordnance remaining, orbited over the area. The team, their mobility hampered by the wounds, used this opportunity to move to a landing zone. My God. And again, this is according to the Silver Star citation that was submitted on your behalf. The Spads had been on target for over 2.5 hours. The wounded ground commander confirmed that from his hospital bed that the Spads had drilled over 50 enemy soldiers, probably more, and broken the assault on the outnumbered team. Lieutenant Ensbretson's courageous and aggressive attack on the face of intense small enemy and automatic fire at absolute minimum altitudes. I mean, treetop doesn't get any more minimum than that. And with complete disregard for his own safety, completely disorganized the enemy ground force and rendered their attack ineffective. The lives of the already wounded Free World forces were saved by the accurate Spad strike. By his gallantry and devotion to duty, Lieutenant Ensbretson has reflected great credit upon himself and the U.S. Air Force. Amen. What a target, but 2.5 hours.
I've had 2 times in my career over there where you get so focused, so intense, for me at least,
Yeah.
you don't think. You only act from instinct. And I had to find them. I got some guidance from the FAC. I know that I saw them. Andrew Brown told me that he looked over the side where Miller was, the enemy was, they were swarming on the bottom side of the hill, and he said that it was over. And this A1 came and blew the MFers away. And that was me. I know that.
Wow.
I don't remember that. I'll
Sure.
be candid about it. It was just you.
And as we just described in the citation, that gun run, that last run you made, broke their back. It gave them enough time to get the helicopters in now
back in.
to extract the team.
Everything I've said was verified by Ed Blythe. And he kept telling me, Don, I kept saying, no, I couldn't have done that. And he said, no, you did that. And he said, we were all dead if it wasn't for you. I don't even know how to deal with that now. I get emotional about it.
And you did it. You broke the back, helicopters come in, and that is one day in SOG, January 5th, 1970, and hats off to you. Recently, within the last few weeks, I heard for the first time that the number of A1 Skyraider KIAs was 102 over the entire war.
That was the number of casualties.
Casualties, not KIAs.
KIAs.
Okay.
Yeah, that were killed.
So that just gives us the extent of...
Okay, yes, I'm sorry.
That's
yes,
okay.
That is the number, and we have people missing too. So I guess you can sum this up as we both were willing to die for each other.
Amen.
And that, if there's anything better than that, I don't know what it is.
Big thanks to John Stryker Meyer and Jocko Willink Productions for letting me share that interview with you. I did edit it pretty heavily for time, so if you want to hear the entire conversation, look for SOGcast episode 45 everywhere that podcasts are found. In the final installment of this series, we'll consider the legacy of SOG, including the fake controversy that got many of them talking after decades of silence. That's 2 weeks from now, when we return with more stories of service, sacrifice, and healing. See you then.